Challengers is the movie of the summer. Ever since the first trailer and I saw Zendaya sandwiched between those two fan fiction simps, I knew my butt was going to be in that seat as soon as possible. I've seen this film twice and it is everything I saw in that initial trailer and a little bit more. And while there were times I think that it dragged a little bit, just a little bit, it felt good to see toxic queerness and toxic, romantic drama back, baby. Adrian Lyne wishes he made Challengers. Plus, I found that I really love the character of Tashi Duncan. Everything about the character just pulled me in. And while I think the performance really does coast on Zendaya as a figure, I think she did a really good job. I think that this film really highlights why she, amongst her peers, has become a superstar and such a global phenomenon. This is the movie that I think people will look at as her successful Patty Duke transition out of being seen primarily as a teenager and Disney kid to an adult actress. Although it will still be an upward climb because she does look super young, and during the time jumps, the hair, the bob was doing a lot. The bob was bobbing. We love it. Online, there's a lot of conversation about who is the villain of the film, and a TikTok from a film critic, Mutual Stoobs, made me realize that in not having seen any of the non-theater trailers, I missed that we were supposed to see Tashi as a potential villain, because apparently in one of the trailers for the movie Maneater Plays,
based on the way the film was marketed and the early reactions to Challengers, I went into this film expecting Tashi Duncan to be an incredibly manipulative and devious but super fun femme fatale. Her pulling the strings behind the scenes intentionally and toying with these men's emotions just for fun. I was completely shocked to find that she's actually an incredibly tragic figure.
Hey, I love you.
I know.
And that intrigued me. And I'm sure, considering how the narrative focuses on her being a home wrecker as being the object of affection for our leading guys, there will be the usual suspicious attempts to turn her into a malicious figure in the way of boy love. I don't want to see the AO3 tags, but I have heard things. It is what it is. I, for one, reject the idea that Challengers needs a villain, and screenwriter Justin Kirkus has said himself that he doesn't see anyone as a villain, that they are just a collection of complex people, but some have walked away thinking that Tashi is the most villainous for her dismissal and lack of seeming genuine love for either of her two little white boys, who she's not taking such good care of, honestly, which good for her. I respect that. And I find that vilification or potential vilification of Tashi interesting enough that I wanted to make this video, because never when I was coming into this weird sports Merther AU did I ever consider her to be bad or malicious, partly because I support women's wrongs, but also in this film romance drama around the sport of tennis, my assumption was always coming in that Tashi was going to be the wrong party, the person whose dreams had been truly deferred, and I think I'm right. Directed by Luca Guadagnino of Call Me By Your Name fame, the film is about three people who have failed to read The Ethical Slut. You have Art Donaldson and Patrick Zweig as two childhood friends and tennis players who fall in love with rising female tennis star Tashi Duncan the summer before Art and Tashi go to Stanford. The three make out on a motel bed, and Tashi says that she will give her number to whomever of the two wins the tennis match the next day.
But what do you want?
I want to watch some good fucking tennis.
Patrick wins and he dates Tashi for a while, but after a massive fight and Tashi suffering a career-ending injury, they break up. And Art is there to pick up the pieces like a little rodent. He's like, you know who he reminds me of? And I do agree with the Disney Mouse Boy memes, but I also think he looks like the little boy, like Arthur from The Sword and the Stone, like with the hair. As you guys probably know from the trailer, she ends up married to Art, who goes on to be a mostly good pretty good tennis player who's finally trying to win the US Open in his early 30s, but there's a sense that he really wants to retire. Screenwriter Justin Kirkus, who's the husband of Past Life director Celine Song, spoke about how the inspiration for the idea. The first part came when he watched Naomi Osaka beat Serena Williams at the 2018 US Open's women's singles. Williams got upset, quite notoriously now, and got a penalty for receiving outside coaching, allegedly. Immediately, that struck me as really cinematic, he says. You're all alone on the court. There is one person in the stands who cares as much about what happens to you as you do, but you can't talk to them. And what if you guys had to talk about something really important and really dramatic beyond tennis? Something about your lives, and something that included the person on the other side of a net. How would you have that conversation without breaking the rules? And so the idea for the movie planted itself in my head. Next was the match between Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic. He noticed that the camera kept cutting to Federer's wife, and she seemed to be really anxious, which, you know, he explains this, but I'm also just like, of course she's anxious. Her man is playing very intense tennis. I was watching her and just thinking, why are you so stressed out? You guys have all the money in the world. You've won 20 Grand Slams. What's so stressful to you? It has to be something else. He would then go on to realize that she had been a rising tennis star in her own right before a foot injury ruined her own career. And she would then become her husband's manager, his coach in a lot of ways. And that moment helped to inspire the character of Tashi and the dynamic that she has with Art in the film. So throughout the nonlinear storytelling, we see the different relationships cycle back and forth with Tashi at the center of Art and Patrick's desires. In my opinion, of the three main characters, personally, Tashi and Patrick are the most well developed, while Art, while looking so very wet in the eyes, there are layers to him by far, and I see a lot of people are the most into him, and maybe it's just the fact that I really do prefer dirtbag brunettes, but he was sort of the less compelling piece of these, you know, these two Disney mouse boys. I think that it was really because he was so transparent in everything that he was feeling and doing that I really just couldn't see him as anything more than just someone who is, you know, giving hateration holleration. And between the two, the dynamic is that Patrick is charming, has a big, allegedly, and has natural talent and comes from money. But he plays pauper in an attempt to make his career doing the one thing he's good at, tennis, everything about him. And even though he's pretty decent at it, he's never going to do more, which is a big part of why his relationship with Tashi doesn't work out. He's not driven, and he doesn't manage to actually make anything of himself because he's not dedicated to really honing his craft. He treats Tashi's desire to go to college as part of a brand building narrative rather than a genuine desire to better herself beyond solely relying on a sport.
You're making us wait for you. The 18-year-old tennis phenomenon who cares about her education. It's brilliant, seriously. You can already see the Adidas campaign.
You know, he's giving, I would say, Leo Sun, Sag Rising, but a little bit of Pisces Moon. Just a little toxic bit of the Pisces Moon. And Art is kind of like a chihuahua in a golden retriever's body, just like emotionally manipulative with a sweet smile, but also to a degree very genuine. He has just enough of that genuineness that you do believe he truly does love Tashi and care about his family and what they've built together, but that underlined insecurity, that almost dependent parasitic simping is what leads him to be a good, solid partner in doubles, but ultimately not confident enough and driven enough to go beyond that. There's a scene in the film where he confronts Patrick and he is like,
Not quite as embarrassing as you being here.
I'm just stopping by, man. This is where you live.
and I'm like, dog, you're visiting because you suck. Like you're visiting because there are passengers on your plane and it's a little loaded. It is sort of a turn off that while he puts Tashi on this pedestal, which she deserves, but he also has to tear down Patrick in order to validate his own scummy, backstabbing, snaky behavior. And they both kind of suck in the same way. All three are cheaters, because they, again, haven't read The Ethical Slut, haven't read Polysecure. I would think it's like the poly, right? Like Polysecure, Polywise, Polyrath. They just went straight to Polyrath. While the love triangle in sports anime, like sexual tensions, have been at the forefront of challengers discourse, I really feel like when I was watching the movie and thinking about the characters, I felt like tennis really informed a lot more than what's been discussed, especially around Tashi and the way she views tennis as a relationship, and why, due to that, her relationships with both Pat and Art are unfulfilled when we see her with them, because she feels unfulfilled with her own relationship with tennis and the way tennis loved her but didn't ultimately love her enough.
This video is sponsored by Incogni. I am so beyond pleased with this sponsor because I personally have been dealing with so many spam calls and spam emails in the past few years. I cannot explain to you how stressful it is to already be dealing with medical issues, getting into an accident, trying to handle all of that, and then getting constant phone calls about car insurance when you have no car. Data brokers make your information vulnerable, especially to potential stalking or harassment, especially if you are a marginalized person online, people trying to come for you. It's so stressful. But even as a layperson, it is just stressful to be bombarded constantly with potential calls or information and getting confused. I've had my parents sometimes call me and ask me, what is this? And I have to explain, that's AI, that's spam, that is not me. And when you think about things getting leaked or potential doxing, it's not just you, it's people that you've lived with, people that you've been in community with. And that's what makes Incogni so important. Incogni reaches out to data brokers and requests the removal of your personal information on your behalf. And whenever a new record pops up, because sometimes these data brokers will get the information from you again somehow, it'll automatically send out those requests again. I signed up for it myself. It was very easy. It will show you the information and it tells you the danger level of each one so that you're aware of what's going on. And it is just really comforting to right now have something that will help you with this. And it can be so frustrating to figure out how to get control of your information. It feels like you can never unsubscribe from enough mailing lists for anything to make a difference. So it is such a relief to use Incogni. Since scammers keep getting better, it is just important to stay ahead of the curve so that you can stay about your business. So if you are interested in Incogni and would like to try it out, you can use my unique code here or click on the link below to get 60% off an annual Incogni plan. I personally think it's a great deal. If I wasn't already sponsored with them, I was already planning on getting this for myself anyway, because so many phone calls. So protect yourself, protect your data, try Incogni using my code down below, and get some control, because these scammers never die.
So everything's there for him to do well. Now it's just a matter, can he get his game back on track?
Tennis is a unique sport because women have almost always participated in it. Even if men controlled most of the rules and access to the sport, it has historically been one where women could compete with men pretty evenly. In modern day, it's one of the few sports that pays as much for women's as it does for men, even though it took a while to get there. And women's tennis is as popular as the male equivalent, and women's tennis has absolutely been killing it in the US. I was very young and I wanted to play tennis. I didn't end up doing it because I was too aggressive, and it wasn't popular to do that. It still kind of isn't, but I love the sport. And there are, of course, still, even within that gender somewhat parity, there are still sexist rules, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and racism surrounding the sport. But in general, it is important to understand that women's tennis is taken seriously. David Barry explains in A People's History of Tennis that from at least 1427, we have written evidence of women not just playing tennis, but playing and beating men. And while the sport went in and out of fashion, in around the late 1800s, it was seen as a very acceptable sport for girls. It had no defined masculine codes. It was played with a softball that relied as much on guile as on strength, and it fitted in well to the roster of sports and pastimes the girls' schools and colleges were keen to offer potential students. Lawn tennis offered an opportunity in an acceptable social setting for young women to develop more physical freedom than croquet and archery allowed. there was another benefit as well. Tennis allowed them to display their talents as cultured ladies, while also providing a marriage market in a seemingly innocent and acceptable way. Yet as women became more and more dominant and demanding to be taken seriously as players, you can see how the rules of tennis end up brushing up against them, from the dress codes to just the styling choices. The Wimbleton Championships are one of the most prestigious tennis championships in the world, and they have updated their rules once in nearly 150 years. In 2023, they allowed women to wear dark-colored undershorts, because traditionally they have to wear all white, not off-white, not cream. That shit has to be white. And you can imagine as a player who menstruates that this would be potentially stressful, but also just like uncomfortable if you're someone who sweats. Robert Lake, the author of A Social History of Tennis in Britain, told BBC Culture that white hides sweat the best, looks clean, sharp, and tidy, representing goodness aesthetically, and, given cricket connections, also reflects upper middle class leisure historically. And it's also notable that the rules have gotten stricter since the 80s for both genders in terms of what they're allowed to do. And when it comes to professional tennis, it wasn't until 1970 that Billie Jean King and 8 other players would start what would become the Women's Tennis Association, with a tour of women's only tournaments that became a way of providing female tennis players to actually start getting paid in tournaments that weren't just the major ones. This would be especially important for women of color who played tennis, who would already be ostracized outside of major tournaments. Because even in those major tournaments, it wasn't until 2007 that Wimbledon and the French Open finally joined the other 2 Grand Slams in offering equal prize money for men and women. 2007. When it comes to race in tennis, many have discussed how racist abuse towards them it has actually gotten worse with time. American tennis star Sloane Stephens said in an interview, quote, "Obviously, it's been something I have dealt with my whole career. I think that, like I said, it's only continued to get worse, and people online have the free reign to say and do whatever they want behind fake pages, which is obviously very troublesome." When most people think of Black tennis players, I think it's mostly women that come to mind, but for Black men in tennis, Arthur Ashe is still the GOAT, and is currently still the only Black man to win the singles titles at Wimbledon, the US Open, or the Australian Open, and one of only 2 men of Black African ancestry to win any Grand Slam singles titles, the other being Yannick Noah, who has won the French Open. Thankfully, this could slowly be changing because Black men are currently making some real gains in the sport, which is so awesome, but for a long time, it just wasn't seen as a really ideal sport for young Black men. It's very gate-kept in general. That hasn't really changed, but a lot of the really good training grounds are on country clubs. It costs a lot of money to get good rackets and upkeep and find really good court time. Like, I know there's a lot of us who learn tennis and all these kind of things playing at, in the park and doing it against the wall. That's how I learned, but it's still not the same. Basketball and football, both American and proper football, are just largely more egalitarian for kids across all socioeconomic spheres. So it makes sense that if you're a young Black kid playing a sport and you come from a working class background, basketball, football, swimming are just better things to do, especially if you do have access to a YMCA. And tennis just is very expensive, very posh, and it's still a super, super white sport. And you also have more options as a Black athlete to do other sports that get you more money, more attention, or just, more. Not that tennis isn't a masculine sport, it is, but I think that it's more sexually egalitarian in how it's perceived than other sports. All this to say is that you have a sport like tennis that has a history of sexism, racism, and classism. And then you have a character like Tashi who intersects all of these things and is also coming of age with the knowledge of what happened to Black athletes in the past and seeing what's happening to Black athletes in tennis currently.
Boarding school? No, we couldn't afford it. And even if I could get a scholarship or something, there's no way that my parents would want me coming of age in an environment like that.
Why? What were they afraid of?
In Challengers, we get one true moment that is just about Tashi, that doesn't narratively connect her to one of the boys, and that is when she is crying on the tree, taking off her brace, and sitting and contemplating how her life, everything that she's been working towards for as long as she's probably been able to stand and hold a racket, is over. It is a moment I think doesn't get enough focus, but it's super important in understanding Tashi. Because it's about Tashi the person and tennis player, and not Tashi the love object. It is a moment of her sitting in the pain of her tennis career being over, and all that meant to her, to her family, and to what she could have come to represent in tennis itself. Because if you're a Black woman who plays tennis, you are just so aware of the legacy of what came before you and what you're in. In an interview with Vulture, Kirkus said that the story of American tennis is Black women for the past however many decades. I also knew that I didn't want to not specify the races of the characters. It always feels to me like you're avoiding something. Her being a Black woman informs a lot about how she navigates her situation and how she navigates her relationship with these guys. The timeline of the film tells us that Tashi was considered an up-and-coming star in 2006, which means, like most millennials and under, she came of age during the rise of the Williams sisters. She saw the struggles they faced, how they redefined the sport, and also how their race and class never ever stopped being a topic of conversation. It is implied that Tashi herself comes from a working class background, and said explicitly by Patrick that she will be the one to financially bring her family up with her.
She's gonna turn a whole family into millionaires.
Even while being biracial, tennis is still a very white sport, and neither Art nor Patrick really understand that. They don't understand what she says when she mentions that her parents wouldn't want her coming of age in a really preppy boarding school. Unlike Art and Patrick, we see that Tashi understands her tenuous place in tennis, the potential it has for her as a success, but also how quickly it can shatter and change. That not all progress is set in stone. When people think of Black trailblazers in tennis, most people know Arthur Ashe, but before him was Althea Gibson. Born in South Carolina in 1927, Gibson's family moved to Harlem during the Great Migration. She started playing tennis in 1939, and from there rose to become an elite athlete. She was the first Black woman to play at Wimbleton, the first African-American athlete to win a Grand Slam tournament, and in 1958 she was named Female Athlete of the Year. She was the first Black woman to appear on the covers of Sports Illustrated and Time. Yet she also faced the indignity of having to take a chromosome test to prove that she was biologically female before she could compete at the US Open, which is your annual reminder that transphobia shouldn't do it. At the time, there were no professional tours for women, so despite getting her hand shaken by the Queen of England at the time, it didn't translate into opportunities. When she and her Jewish doubles partner, Angela Buxton, applied for membership to the All England Club, neither were accepted. Gibbons said in her book, "The taste of disappointment was distinctly bitter to me. I was willing to grant that pro tennis just wasn't what it once had been, and that public interest in the sport had declined. But when I looked around me, I saw that white tennis players, some of whom I had thrashed on the court, were picking up offers and invitations. Suddenly it dawned on me that my triumphs had not destroyed the racial barriers once and for all, as I had perhaps naively hoped. Or if I did destroy them, they had been erected behind me again." She would go on to play professional golf, but the same racial issues persisted.
And I don't know how she managed. I mean, how she managed even to play professional golf, I don't know, but to manage as an African American in those days really was a very difficult path to tread.
Gibson suffered 2 cerebral hemorrhages and a stroke in 1992, and when she asked for help from any of the multiple sports associations in tennis that may have felt obligated to help her, they did not respond. It was her former doubles partner, Angela Buxton, who helped raise nearly $1 million to kind of help her with her medical bills. That was it. Gibson died on September 28th, 2003. For a long time, Althea Gibson was the face of Black women in tennis. Not just its successes and athleticism, but the racism, the misogynoir, the transphobia. And while others would come and be more financially successful, other aspects of that part of the game would not change. And again, if we're thinking about Tashi as someone growing up in the world of tennis at this time, she'd be aware of this. And as she's playing and figuring out how to manipulate and be a part of the tennis world, she is seeing the Williams sisters rising and being scrutinized at every single turn, right as another hero in the sport who looked like her somewhat would have passed away.
Okay, now I'm gonna show you the trophy room.
Venus and Serena Williams are two of the most famous tennis players and two of the greatest athletes of all time, with Serena Williams herself being considered one of the greatest tennis players of all time. One of the greatest athletes of all time, period. There is no black girl or girl of color, or hell, any girl who picks up a racket without thinking of her and the impact she has made to the sport, along with her sister Venus, who is still an active player, by the way, and still making a lot of money and breaking a lot of records. In singles, Serena has held 73 titles and Venus has earned 49. And again, she's still working. When I tell you that they defined a generation, and I'll say this, generations of tennis in terms of power, undisputed, but that came at a cost. Yes, we can list their wins and their bona fides, but there was a cost to everything that they did. Their background, being from Compton, was used against them whenever they did anything that pushed up against the norms of what a tennis player, especially a female tennis player, should be like in a very white, conservative sport. From their braids, their outfits, their rage, and their celebrations, everything about them was very heavily picked apart to prove whenever they stumbled that there was just something, that didn't quite fit about them. They were great, but people had notes. Venus and Serena were taught that there is a life beyond tennis. When Serena was asked about the reason for her numerous outside interests, she has been quoted as saying, "We get bored quickly. A lot of players have a myopic view, but we know tennis can only last so long. After their careers, a lot of stars say, 'What should I do now?' We've always had something to fall back on." The tennis establishment and mainstream media have tended to frame Venus's and Serena's off-court activities as frivolous and self-indulgent. Now, all of this is already fucked up and gross and racist, but I think the biggest thing that I had no idea of actively is what happened in the 2003 to 2004 season of their career. In 2003, their oldest sister was murdered, and both sisters pulled out of the Australian Open. This was used as a way of shaming their blackness, their hometown, and their dedication to the sport was called into question. Sports Illustrated feature reporter John L. Wortham questioned Serena's withdrawal from the Australian Open. He wrote, "If I'm Nike and just lavished her with $40 million, I'm not smiling. Privately, folks at the WTA were less than pleased that Serena withdrew." In March 2004, following an 8-month layoff, Serena, ranked number 6 in the world that time, played the NASDAQ 100 tourney in Miami, which she won. A New York Times reporter characterized her time away as a mystery absence, asserting, "There's no sense of debt service here. By accepting the endorsement dollars and spoils of player celebrity, Williams owes sponsors, officials, and fans an honest effort when healthy." When addressing questions about her sabbatical, Serena said, "Tennis was just so much of my life, and then you begin to realize there are so many things in life that are more important than hitting the ball over the net." So, subsequent to her return, Serena, like her sister, alluded to her sister's death in her discussion of her time away from the tour. Nevertheless, the dominant media rendered the death of her sister invisible by the repeated portrayals of Serena's absence as illustrative of her disrespect for the tour and assumed white tennis audience. Their sister gets murdered, and they're like, what about Nike? What about the sponsorships? What about her fans? What's her dedication to the craft of tennis? Now, mind you, I didn't know that her sister had been murdered in 2003. I probably would have been in like the 6th, 5th grade or something like that, because I graduated 8th grade in 2005. Not important. But the point is that, I didn't know this, but they would have known this. The people in charge would have reported this and seen this. I mean, the eldest sister of the Williams sisters being murdered is a huge story, and this is their response. This is their callous nature. But again, I want to just highlight this one thing. Notice how in challengers, connecting the dots. See, I'm not just doing this research for fun. What does Zendaya say?
I don't want my only skill in life to be hitting a ball with a racket.
They were hyper scrutinized, and multiple articles would talk about their decline, and you just see a total lack of humanity. It punished everything about them that didn't adhere perfectly to tennis. And on to that, the dual ways in which their bodies were talked about. When Serena wore that cat suit that she had made to deal with her blood clots post-pregnancy, they changed the rules of the sport to make sure that it would never happen again. They called it tacky and inappropriate. And you look at a neck-to-toe cat suit and you're like, what's inappropriate about it? And you realize the answer is they couldn't handle that ass.
Serena Williams will have to ditch her skin-tight catsuit when she plays at the French Open. The outfit that she wore earlier this summer will not pass the new dress code.
They couldn't handle that ass. And while meltdowns are obviously seen as an issue in tennis, like, you get penalized for it, which is just so okay. Like, there are definitely plenty of men who have reputations for having meltdowns, and yet that's just true into them having a hot temper. In an infamous cartoon of Serena having a meltdown during her match with Naomi Osaka, it was racialized to make Serena look like an animal, very much hearkening to minstrelsy art, and Naomi, who is half black herself, as some kind of innocent waif. Even though Naomi owns her blackness, she's Haitian, she's very proud to be Haitian as much as she's proud to be Japanese, so it's well that they even put them in competition, but because she's more petite and lighter skinned, that just becomes the narrative that's easy for them. Because even when Serena is a dominant player, even when she's one of the most important, highest grossing, best played players in the world, they still have to take a moment to humble her, to remind her that she's still never going to be a thin white woman that they would rather see hitting a racket and be that dominant. Her blackness could always be used against her. Her family could always be used against her. Her outside interests could also be used against her. Everything about this would be used against her. And yet, despite that, in spite of all that, she's the GOAT, which is why we have players like a Naomi Osaka, like a Coco Gauff, who will always call her out, call Venus out, and highlight the impact that they had. Because they and Althea made it possible. They all made it possible to be this successful in the sport and be black. But they have also made it very clear it will never be easy. It will never be easy. You can be the greatest of all time and people will still play in your motherfucking face. They will still say that a man could beat you, even though they couldn't even lick your ass. Sorry, I just saw my mother today. The ancestors in me. Even though they couldn't lick your asshole. So it's clear. And the reality is very clear when you watch black women play tennis. Is that even with all that trailblazing, even if one of the top players in the world in tennis is a black woman, that doesn't mean that things are going to change. You are still not allowed to be a mediocre black female tennis player. At least not yet.
Go home, ask your parents for a seat on the board, or you know what, matter of fact, ask them for some money, okay? Go be like any other spoiled kid who has ever mounted to nothing in their fucking life, and stop this performance of being a down-on-your-luck professional.
Tashi says tennis is a relationship. And if that's the case, the reason why her relationships with Art and Patrick fail, in my opinion, isn't because of a lack of love. It is a lack of respect. Respect for the game, what the game means, what it takes to be good, to be excellent at tennis. Tashi's relationship to tennis will always be different than theirs. Patrick and Tashi fall out because Patrick is okay being mediocre on tour. Embarrassing. Couldn't be, just like, Coco even said, couldn't be me, girl. Okay? That is not don't claim him. Tashi mentions that he calls her complaining about getting screwed while also mocking and dismissing the advice that Tashi is giving.
How's coasting by on talent going for you? You know how ridiculous it is to hear you call me every week talking about all the ways that you're getting screwed over on tour, as if that's a good use of my fucking time.
As well as, again, belittling the fact that she's taking her time to better herself, to stretching, to taking each match, even lower stakes ones, seriously, because that's the kind of dedication that the sport deserves, that each player deserves. To not just come in there smirking, but to actually do the work, Patrick thinks he's Tashi's peer, and they ain't even fucking close.
You're not a member of my fan club?
I'm your peer.
He assumes, though, that he can just take up that space. And even though that charisma is attractive, that entitlement is very off-putting, okay? Because I know it ain't that big, girl. It's definitely not. I don't think Charles III have it like that. And Art doesn't take the game seriously enough by not trying as hard as he could without being pushed into it by something else, by allowing his insecurities to stop him from actually playing the game, of being so fragile. Not even being fragile, but having the freedom to be so fragile that he can just kind of fall apart. He's a parasite, you know, like semi, not derogatorily, but he needs something to help him care. And Tashi resents his passivity with the sport because he's allowed so many chances to be that mediocre high-end player. And he has that successful career while being mid, where she didn't get to go anywhere near what she was capable of, despite being the most talented out of all three of them. Then the question is, why then is she with them? And I could get into a whole thing about how it's hard to date as like a heterosexual female athlete. But I think when it comes down to is, despite their issues, despite them not respecting the game and what it means as much as they should, there is a level where they do respect her. They respect her as a player. They respect her mindset. They may take it out on her sometimes because, you know, she's no passengers on her plane, but they are attracted to her skill on the court. They're not intimidated by her in a way that desexualizes her. And in a career that's very isolating, driven, and competitive, it makes sense for her to be attracted to other players who have the nugget of excellence in them that could be crafted if they just did a little bit more work, you know? And they're simps for her, and that's always kind of fun to play with. Still, the relationships fail because in the end, she doesn't truly respect either of them, because they don't respect the sacrifices needed to play tennis, to be a truly good tennis player, to maintain that relationship with the sport, and understanding that it is a relationship that is very fucking toxic. And I think that's a part of it too. The relationship to tennis is also a toxic one in itself, so that they're all connected by that really fucked up toxicity of this sport. And I think the reason why Tashi says that she wants to see good fucking tennis when she talks about them playing is because that's what makes it all worth it, right? All the sacrifices, all the training, all the childhood moments you didn't get to have, all the paths you didn't take, all of that goes away. All of that is worth it if you either play or see a good fucking game of tennis.